Welcome back to our channel. My name is Jennifer Roblin and I'm an anxiety specialist and therapist. In today's video, we're talking about Cognitive Behaviour Therapy, CBT, for anxiety, and this focuses on our thoughts. So do hang around to the end of this video as I will be sharing lots of top tips and advice with you. So let's jump straight in with a caveat. So whilst I believe that CBT does not always go deep enough in unravelling anxiety, it can be a really good starting point for many. So in this video, I want to help you identify some of your repetitive thoughts and beliefs so that you can catch them and avoid that overwhelm and anxiety that is often associated with them. I have also included links in the description that support this video, and it gives you additional free tools and workbooks, additional resources that you can use alongside your work with CBT. So when we talk about cognitive behaviour, just to be clear, this is just a term that's used to describe our thoughts. Now our thoughts, they influence our feelings and emotions, which determine our behaviour, the actions that we take. Anxiety is an emotion, so understanding our thoughts can help us to modify our anxious feelings and behaviours. Our thoughts, feelings, emotions and behaviours, they're all interconnected, and when we are feeling anxious, they can lead to physical sensations such as increased heart rate, rapid and shallow breathing, maybe overheating or sweating, and we might have trembling legs and tense muscles or muscle aches. Likewise, we may feel a physical sensation such as being really hot and sweaty, and we might start to scan our bodies for evidence that we are anxious. This will have an impact on the way that we think. For example, I am going to have a panic attack, and that may influence our behaviours, such as I need to get out of the situation that I'm in really fast. This all happens so quickly. We have to make a conscious effort to catch ourselves and question what exactly is going on for us. And to do this, we need to understand a little bit about what anxiety is. So, anxiety is characterised by feelings of fear, worry, nervousness, or overwhelm. It's perfectly natural when we're in a fearful situation. However, it can be debilitating when we are feeling it on a regular basis. When we are fearful of fear itself, this can lead to prolonged anxiety, known as a generalised anxiety disorder. We call it GAD, and it's often associated with panic attacks too. When we can recognise, understand and modify our anxious thoughts, we're able to better cope with everyday stresses and anxiety. So you may be wondering, how does cognitive behaviour therapy work? Well, the aim of CBT is to gather evidence and uncover the facts about our thoughts, either based on something that has either happened to us in our past, is happening to us right now, or that we're predicting will happen to us in the future. So how do we examine our thoughts? How do we look for the evidence behind them? Now, a good anxiety therapist knows the right questions to ask so you can better understand a situation that you're actually going through. But before I share those questions with you, if you are getting value from this video, I would love for you to like and subscribe and hit that notification button so that you hear every time that we release new content. I'd also love to know your comments, so please drop me some comments, any questions you have about anxiety, and I'll make sure I get back to you with those. So please do hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, and then you'll get kept up to date with all our content. So back to the questions that you can ask. One of the first questions to ask yourself is, what is the likelihood that this anxiety-inducing event will actually happen? You might want to ask, if this event were to happen, what is the worst case scenario? And whilst we don't want to dwell on the worst case, understanding what the worst case is helps us to know the next question. What would you do if that was to happen? How would you handle it? You might want to ask, is there any other explanation to account for what could happen? And lastly, do you, with 100% certainty, know all of the facts about this situation? It's important that we notice both the positive and the negative scenarios in this case, because we're not trying to bury how we feel around anxiety, but instead we're acknowledging how we feel. In this way, we have the opportunity to examine how we could cope in a worst case scenario, as well as the opportunity to look at alternative outcomes. The more we can think about alternative positive outcomes, the more you train your brain to understand that you would be able to cope, and the initial thought is no longer as scary as it initially appeared to be. You may have heard the term neurons that fire together wire together. Science has proved without a shadow of a doubt that we all have the capacity to change the way our brains work. This is a term known as neuroplasticity. When we adjust our thoughts, we're actually creating new neural pathways in our brain. Whilst one new thought will not completely change your life overnight, repeatedly practicing different types of thought patterns over and over actually rewires our brain so that new, more realistic and helpful patterns of thoughts can become more natural. It's a bit like going to the gym. We need to go to build up our physical health, and we need to be consistent and practice. We need to keep doing repetitions. And the brain's a bit the same. We need to keep practicing and repeating so that we can keep the brain functioning optimally. You may have heard the saying, practice makes permanent. By consistently examining our thoughts, beliefs and behaviours, we can learn to make better choices about situations that impact us. When we discover that a thought is not entirely true, we can choose to refocus our attention, calm our instinctive fight and flight response, and reduce our anxiety. An alternative approach would be to understand the new evidence and facts and proactively come up with a better solution that can be more empowering and effective in the face of anxiety. Finally, if there is nothing that can be done to change a situation, we can work to accept this and let go of our attempts to try and control it. Now, in this instance, the circle of concern, control and influence could be really helpful, and you'll find the link to that workbook over in the description. Because even when we believe something is totally outside of our control, we can often influence the outcome. So we want to align our thoughts and our behaviours. Whilst understanding and acknowledging our thoughts is one tool in overcoming anxiety, we also need to be aware of our behaviours and make sure they're aligned. It's often easier to recognise a behaviour or a physical sensation before we even become conscious of our thoughts. A question you can ask yourself is, what is it that I'm avoiding right now? For example, if we continue to avoid meetings and speaking up in front of others, the anxiety is very likely to still be there when we actually have to do this, regardless of how we've been trying to train ourselves to think. This is because we've not proved to ourselves that we're actually capable of doing the thing that we're trying to avoid. Therefore, we need to work towards overcoming the fears, and we can do this using something called exposure therapy to confront the very thing that we are trying to avoid. This is done using small baby steps to ensure it's not too overwhelming and anxiety inducing. Again, you can find a link about exposure therapy. I have a workbook over in the description that I'm sure you'll find helpful. So I want to tell you about a client of mine. He continued to have many negative thoughts about speaking up in meetings or interviews. His contract was coming to an end, and he was worried that his fear and anxiety would prevent him from getting a new job. Now, he had a very good job. He was a very senior person in a large bank. But he was avoiding calls from recruiters, and this was leaving him feeling guilt and shame that he would not be able to support his family. And this was obviously increasing his anxiety even further. By the time he contacted me, the situation was dire. He had no option but to take action. He was also avoiding talking to friends and his neighbours by this stage, as his confidence and self-belief had hit rock bottom. Now, the problem occurred a few months earlier when he'd been in a meeting and the CEO had turned up unexpectedly. My client was asked a question and he didn't have the answer on the tip of his tongue. He froze. He was unable to speak up and had to walk out of the meeting shaking and sweating. He was mortified and believed that he was no longer capable of doing his job. He believed that everyone in his office saw him as a failure and he'd embarrassed himself in front of the CEO. As a result, he avoided attending meetings at all cost. He would procrastinate, and his fears prevented him from properly preparing for future meetings. Instead, his entire focus was on panicking and freezing again. And unsurprisingly, this is exactly what happened when he was forced to attend another meeting. So it reinforced his own thoughts. So to overcome this, we broke the challenge he was facing into small, manageable steps. And over the next couple of months, he was able to prove to himself that he was capable. I will explain exactly how we did this. And if you haven't already liked this video and subscribed to my channel, please do go ahead. I'm always sharing top tips and giving away free resources to manage anxiety. And I'd love to be able to offer these tips to you or anyone else who may be struggling with anxious thoughts. Now, it's my belief that nobody needs to struggle with anxiety, so I want to get these videos out to as many people as possible. Thank you. So back to my client. He predicted that everyone witnessed his voice shaking and saw how he panicked, and therefore they thought less of him. He believed his colleagues no longer felt he was capable of doing his job, and therefore he was going to lose his job. He avoided conversations with anyone outside of his immediate family for fear of making a fool of himself. He was absolutely certain in his mind that the same thing will happen again. He told me he couldn't help himself. He told me he was unable to ever attend a meeting again as he was too anxious. Now, obviously, I knew that we were able to overcome that, but you can see how thinking that way would impact how you turn up, how you show up every time. So the next meeting he had was a Zoom call with me. He had a large whiskey to help him through the conversation, despite it being 9 o'clock in the morning. We were able to overcome that quite quickly. Over a couple of sessions, we looked for the evidence of what he was telling me. I asked him, I wanted to know if he had asked any of his colleagues about that specific day when the CEO had turned up. And he had. He told me that his trusted colleague hadn't actually noticed his voice break. His colleague had assumed he had to leave the meeting abruptly because something came up. And the colleague was surprised when my client told him he had panicked. My client's colleague was really understanding and reassured him with a pat on the back. We can all have days like that, mate. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? The colleague had a completely different take on the event than my client. But my client was unable to hear what was actually being said. And instead, he imagined and predicted what he thought others saw, heard, and felt. I asked my client if anyone else had sought out his opinion since. Yes, they had, he explained. but only because no one else knows the project in as much detail. So my client is still the expert in this area, and his colleagues are still valuing him and what he has to say. So initially my client responded with, yes, but, and he'd come up with a justification in his own mind why this didn't count. Despite his contract being scheduled to end 2 weeks after the meeting with the CEO, he felt he had failed when the contract actually ended. The reality is that his contract was ending regardless, so how can he label himself as a failure? He knew that in advance of the meeting. He knew that the contract was ending. Once he was able to see that his thoughts were not real, we used the exposure ladder alongside more intense techniques to help him build back up his self-belief and his confidence, and to reverse the snowball effect of that perceived fear and failure. So just as a side, if you know a child struggling with anxiety, or if you are struggling with anxiety in the workplace, you may wish to download one of my ebooks for more specific support. You can find the links in the description. So to talk about the snowball effect, this is also known as fueling the fire. This occurs when we have a negative thought which results in avoidant or protective behaviours. We may put coping mechanisms in place so that we can avoid doing what it is we don't want to do. Over time, the thought gets bigger and bigger, and it gets more and more distorted until it becomes all-consuming. This is when our thoughts and beliefs can make our anxiety worse and even cause more problems. In my client's case, he had stopped socialising with friends and neighbours, and that was something that he'd previously enjoyed. As a result, he was feeling alone and isolated. So we have to have a balanced view of our thoughts. When we look at our thoughts realistically and can question our initial thoughts, we can start to see them for what they truly are. They're just thoughts. When we were able to modify these negative thoughts, we mitigate them, triggering our anxiety and prevent them from avoiding things that are important to us. Now, I need to just touch on a negativity bias here. It may or may not be something you're familiar with, but we all have a negativity bias. Now, this is a result of our anxiety when we are hypervigilant, and it's actually designed to keep us safe. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that anxiety is evolutionary and it served us well when we all lived in caves. We needed to be aware of the tiger in the bushes more than we needed to notice a beautiful tree. So we want our anxiety radar to be alerting us if there is actual danger out there. It is protecting us and it is doing a good thing. However, when we are anxious, when we're stuck in traffic, checking our inboxes, or triggered by a colleague, anxiety is not so helpful. Negative thoughts can cause anxiety, and when we are anxious, we are more likely to have these negative thoughts and assume the worst case scenario. So we need to reframe negative thoughts, and you can do that using the Reframing Negative Thought workbook, link in description. So I just want to talk to you about a few different types of negative thoughts, because it's helpful to be aware of some of the kinds of thoughts that you may have that may help with your anxiety experience. So cognitive distortions are thoughts that are heavily influenced by emotions and may not be consistent with the facts of a situation. As we're able to identify our distorted thoughts, we can notice patterns in our thinking and are better able to catch ourselves when we notice an anxiety-inducing thought. So there's a few of them. I'm going to go through 10 of them here. We have what we call black and white thinking, sometimes known as all or nothing thinking. This is when we need to learn to see shades of grey. It's so immensely useful, and we can appreciate that there is a middle ground. It's not just black or white. An example would be saying, I always get anxious when driving. Recognising that you only sometimes get anxious when driving can be a relief, as there are probably other times when you don't feel so anxious. We do something called overgeneralisation. This is when we are seeing a pattern based on a single event or being overly broad in the conclusions we draw. We can blind us to the reality of the situation. An example of this one would be, nothing good ever happens to me. Ask yourself, nothing? Really? And you'll generally find evidence that this thought pattern is not valid. We can use mental filters. This is when we only pay attention to certain types of evidence and we don't register the bigger picture. We may choose to pick out one single negative detail and dwell on it exclusively and ignore all the positives. You might say, the traffic jam ruined my entire day. Even though you actually had a really good phone call with a friend and you caught up with the kids over dinner and you watched your favourite box set. So it's getting that balance. We can be very good at disqualifying the positives. By discounting or rejecting the good things that happen to us, we can feel anxious even when we achieve something great. We may believe something positive was pure luck alone, and we don't believe that we actually deserve the credit. One that I hear with some of the teenagers that I work with, the A star I received in maths was a fluke, so it doesn't count. Yes, it still counts. Jumping to conclusions, mind reading. When we believe we can guess what someone else is thinking or feeling, when they may not be thinking that at all. So if we feel hurt, if someone ignores us as we walk past them in the corridor and they don't notice us, or they don't return a call, we might start feeling anxious and frustrated and a bit annoyed and not understand why. When the reality is most likely that they didn't see us or they're tied up with something else at that precise moment. It's usually nothing to do with us at all. Fortune telling, this is another one I see a lot of. When we think we can predict the future as a result of something that has happened and influenced in our past. For example, if we've been applying for jobs and we didn't get the last 3 interviews, we can start predicting that we won't get the next few jobs. We won't be able to get past the interview stage, and we may give up even trying. But the reality is that no one gets accepted for every job. And eventually, if we keep putting ourselves out there, we will succeed. We have magnification and minimization. This is when we magnify the importance of errors as evidence of the truth. So I took a wrong turn and it was an absolute disaster. Or we minimise a compliment we receive because we think it is undeserved or the person paying us the compliment didn't really mean it. We may just tell ourselves that they were just being nice. It's funny though, isn't it? Because notice how we don't normally apply the same logic if we receive what we perceive to be negative feedback. So how many of these are you recognising? I'd love to know in the comments. We also have labelling and mislabelling. We may label ourselves as terrible at something, such as public speaking, based on an incident that happened many, many years ago, often in our childhood. And as a result of that one incident, we avoid speaking in front of an audience from there on. And we may take one particular situation, such as burning the toast, and label ourselves based on that situation alone. Oh, I'm such an idiot for burning the toast. No, the reality is you just burnt the toast. Catastrophizing. When we think of events as catastrophes instead of acknowledging the reality of the situation. I think we're all familiar with this one. So an example of this one would be, it's an extreme example, but your boss asks you to come to her office. You then assume that she's going to fire you, resulting in you not being able to afford the mortgage. The house will be repossessed. Your partner will leave you and they'll take the kids with you, and you're going to spend the rest of your life alone. The reality is, she just wanted to ask you a question about a report you'd completed. Should and must statements. If you can get rid of the word should and must from your vocabulary, that would be great. Critical words like should and must can put a lot of pressure on us and make us feel guilty, like we've already failed before we have started. So I've been known to say before that I should clean the car this Sunday, when reality is I have no wish to clean the car. I hate cleaning the car and I'd rather have the day with my daughter. So instead of saying what I should be doing, I could make a decision to say, no, I'm going to actually spend it with my daughter instead. And this takes away the guilt immediately. So we also have beliefs around our own ability. If we believe that anxiety itself is dangerous, we may predict that we will lose control, not be able to cope, have a heart attack or pass out. When anxiety symptoms get more extreme, this results in us being anxious about anxiety, and it can lead to increased panic attacks. We may believe that we cannot tolerate the discomfort and the pain of some negative events, and we can question our ability to cope with the future events because of the anxiety, believing if we can't tolerate what's going on right now, how are we ever going to cope with something bigger than this? This belief happens a lot when we look at health anxiety. While it is true that anxiety and worry often have a protective function, it can get dysfunctional. So we may even start believing that if we don't worry about XYZ, then ABC might happen. This results in obsessive compulsive behaviours. You might have heard when people want to make sure they lock the doors and they have to lock them over and over again. We may also have negative thoughts and beliefs about ourselves, others, and the world. These beliefs may even have been handed down to us rather than created by us. So I was led to believe that the world is a really, really dangerous place and terrible things can happen. These kinds of statements that we're told and can hear can make us feel even more anxious, especially around other people, and in my case led to severe social anxiety disorder. We all have some patterns of negative thinking, depending on our past experiences, but sometimes these patterns can get out of control. So self-awareness is key in this instance. Being aware of our thoughts is the first step in overcoming them. Once we are aware, we can start to question their validity. You can use the anxious thoughts diary to assist you by recording the initial thoughts as a statement. So avoid what ifs. So for example, if the thought was, what if I lose my job? It's more impactful to state, I will lose my job. And then you ask yourself the questions based on the statement. So when we're feeling anxious, it's common to have a thought that leads to an even more disturbing thought, which then leads to an even more disturbing thought, and so on and so on. So make sure you get to the bottom of this particular thought. Keep digging until you find the underlying thought. Then go to your anxious thoughts diary, link in the description, and make a note of the date and the situation that is triggering you. How are you feeling right now? What is the automatic thought that you're having? What evidence do you have to support that thought? What evidence do you have against that thought? And once you've looked at the evidence, what is your new revised thought? And notice what your new revised feeling is. So I really hope you found that helpful. If you do need further support to help overcome your anxiety and the accompanying symptoms, then a trained anxiety therapist can prescribe a personalised plan to help you understand the underlying cause, as well as help develop additional coping strategies that are focused around your own individual needs. Now, taking care of our mental health and well-being is an essential part of our overall well-being. And if left unresolved, anxiety can spiral out of control and have a significant impact on relationships, work, school, and family life. So if you do want to take back control and take the next step to having a happier life where your fears no longer hold you back, then you can click on the link below in the comments or in the description, and you can book a free, no obligation consultation call. Thank you for watching to the end, and please do take advantage of all of the free resources. I'd love to know your comments, your feedback, anything you want to ask me. Please pop it in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And until next time, bye for now.